In this video, I want to give you a quick tour of a sewing machine, and then at the end I'll show you how to set it up for quilting. My sewing machine might not look exactly like yours because there are many different brands and models out there, but sewing machines tend to be similar enough that they'll have most of the same components even if they are arranged a little differently. After this guided tour, I recommend you look through your sewing machine's user manual so the two of you can get acquainted. I remember being pretty hesitant about using a sewing machine before I started quilting, but once I got a better handle on how it works, I finally felt confident enough to take the plunge and to get started sewing. So today, let's start at the top and work our way down. So I'm going to start by opening this flap, and the purpose is to keep everything contained while you're moving, but while you're sewing, it's good to have it open. Right here is where your thread goes, and there are two different spools you can choose from when using your thread. You can have one that's horizontal and one that's a vertical. Most of the time I'm going to be using this one, but maybe if you have a bigger spool of thread, you might want to put it up here. This right here is the tension dial, and most of the time auto is going to be just perfect, but sometimes I like to really get specific and I will dial it up just a little bit. And this might change based on how many layers of fabric you have or what kind of fabric you're sewing. So I recommend checking that out and playing around with that to see what is right for your project. And not all machines are equal when it comes to tension. This one has been pretty reliable, but my old Singer, I would have to mess with the tension all the time. So just keep that in mind. If something doesn't look right with your stitches, it's probably the tension. And I'm going to talk about a tension checklist later on in this series. It's going to be certain things that you can check if your tension isn't working. So just looking at it with brand new beginner eyes, it might be sort of hard to figure out how the thread goes through the machine, but luckily there are little numbers that are going to guide you through the process, and I'll show you how that works a little bit later in this video. So after the thread has gone all the way through the machine, it still needs to be threaded through the sewing machine needle, and luckily most machines, especially the newer ones, have automatic needle threaders. That makes it much more easy to get your thread through that tiny eye of the needle, especially if you maybe are working in lower light conditions or maybe you forgot your glasses somewhere else. So I'll show you how that works a little bit later too. Down here is the bobbin case or the hook cover. It's a little plastic piece that protects your bobbin from getting bumped or misaligned while you're sewing. You just push this little button and it pops up, and you can remove it and get to your bobbin. I also want to mention this little hack right here. If you're using a seam guide, it will exceed your bobbin case cover here, and it might start to wear out when you have to unstick it and lift up your cover. But if you take an X-Acto knife and cut along the edges just like that, it'll last a lot longer. It won't last forever because these pieces will eventually wear off sooner than the middle piece. The middle piece will basically stay there forever until you decide to take it off yourself, in my experience. This is the bobbin. It holds the thread that is going to be on the bottom side of your sewing, and when you replace the bobbin into your machine, it needs to go in a very specific way, and it might be different for every sewing machine, but usually they'll include little illustrations that will show you exactly how to do it. So you want your thread to be going this way and then come out like this instead of going the other way, okay? And I am glad they put this here because I constantly forget. I always have to consult the illustration before I put it in. So that goes back down there. There's a little hooky thing right here that it goes around, and then it'll come back up there. And the way you get your thread from here to come up here is to grab this top thread, and then the wheel on the side of your machine, you just spin that forwards so that your needle goes down, bring it back up, and then you just pull on that thread. And then there's your bobbin thread poking through, and you just pull that out, and then you can replace the cover. This metal plate here is called the needle plate, and some machines have multiple that you can change in and out, and they have different functions, but basically the one that comes standard with your machine should work for quilting just fine. Then down here, these bars right here are called feed dogs. I mentioned them in the sewing machine video I did in this series. They're rough and bumpy, and they move up and down as you're sewing so that they can pull the fabric back. So you can see they come up and drop down, come forward and pull and drop down. This wiggly guy right here is called a presser foot. Most people just call them feet though. There are tons and tons and tons of different presser feet, and they all do different jobs. But your general generic foot should be all you need for quilting. You might try out a 1/4 inch seam foot, but I don't tend to like those very much. I don't think they're as accurate as they say they are, and I prefer using a seam guide. But there are tons and tons of different feet. This one has some kind of brush on it. I have no idea what this is. If I consulted my user manual, I'm sure it would explain it. This is a zipper foot, and I use it to attach zippers, but I think probably more often, I use it as a top stitching foot. I believe this is a stitch in the ditch foot. This little piece goes in your seam, and then it's supposed to help you sew right directly into that seam. So it's another one. Then there is the walking foot, which can look pretty different depending on your machine. This is a free motion foot, or a darning foot. So a ton of different feet available out there. Okay, so let's say that I want to change my presser foot. I would push this red button back here. I think you can barely see it on camera, and it'll drop right off. So easy. And then I'll put on my zipper foot. All I have to do is use the little lever back here and drop it down. Oops. Right like that, and it'll snap right on, and then you're good to go. So again, I want to take it off. I push that button. Bring this one back. Clips in. So easy. Although it's not quite as easy if I wanted to put this on, because I would have to unscrew right here, this screw, and take off the foot holder here. And then this part right here would be screwed on directly onto that foot holder. So a lot of feet, and some of them are a little bit different, but mostly pretty easy to figure out, I think. So when you're ready to sew, you would put your fabric under here, not too far past the needle, and then you would lower your presser foot. And one extra thing about this presser foot, it's not standard across the market. It has an extra lift. So this would be a normal that most machines will have, and then other machines might have this extra lift, and that's for like added bulky stuff. Okay, I thought I was done, but I forgot to talk about the needle. So there are different types of needles based on the material that you're using or the task that you're completing. So you might have a piecing needle and a quilting needle, or you might have one that does both just fine. There are needles for like stretchy fabric, or there are double needles, all sorts of things out there. In order to remove the needle, you'll have to unscrew the needle screw right here. I would recommend, if you're changing the needle for the very first time, go very slow, take a lot of mental pictures so that you can recreate it easily, and also be super careful. My next video is actually going to be about quilting safely, and that includes changing sewing machine needles. So maybe wait and watch that video before you try to change your own sewing machine needle. Before I show you how to set up your sewing machine, I want to show you a few last little odds and ends. So this here is what regulates your speed. So maybe you want to make sure you can't go too fast. So your top speed will be very slow, and then you follow it along. You'll have a medium speed and a fast speed. I tend to keep it on fast because I like the option to go fast, but not because I actually usually sew very fast. I try to keep it moderate because if you are sewing fast, that means you can make mistakes fast. This is a thread cutting button, and not every machine is going to have this, but I really like to use mine. This is the needle up and down button. This is a lock stitch, and I think it's generally used for the embroidery stitches, and I don't tend to use it that much. And this button right here is the back stitch button, which is a good way to secure your stitches. So what you would do is you would sew, push your back stitch button, and it would sew backwards, and then release the button and it'll sew forwards again. So those stitches that go front, back, front, they're nice and locked in. And so people will tend to use these at the beginning and end of a seam. But for quilting, most of the time, you don't need to use the back stitch button. All of this space in here is called the throat space, or some people call it the harp. And all of this flat surface is called your working space. And then finally, down below, I'm not going to take video of it, is your foot pedal, and that is what's going to decide the speed at which your sewing machine sews. Okay, I think that is a pretty good general overview of the sewing machine. So let's go ahead and thread this machine and also wind a bobbin. So this doodad right here is the bobbin winder. Before we can wind the bobbin, we have to unthread the machine. So all the thread is going down here. It's threaded through the needle and everything. We don't want that. So I just pull right here, get all the thread out, and then it's helpfully labeled that while you're threading, if you go down, you'll thread the machine. If you go up, it will be for the bobbin. There is a little hole on both sides of the bobbin, and I'm going to start by threading my thread through that hole. So there we go. I'm going to get a good hold of that so it doesn't go back through, and then I will use my other hand to thread like this, just like so, and then I'll place my bobbin down here. My thread that I threaded through that hole is up here in my hand, and then I'll slide the bobbin winder to the side. Okay, I had to turn my machine on. And I also should mention that normally you wouldn't have any thread in there already, but I'm being lazy and I don't want to remove all of that thread from that bobbin. So I'm just going to wind on top of it for the purposes of this video. So way down below my table, I have my foot pedal. It regulates the speed at which you sew, but it also, when this function is engaged, look down here, it shows you that you're winding a bobbin. It will control how fast your bobbin winds. So I don't like to go super fast because I feel like it doesn't load or it doesn't wind onto your bobbin very uniformly, but maybe that's just me. So I try to go at a sort of medium pace. I hold this and then it winds. So once the thread has gone up and down a couple times on the bobbin, I cut this little piece, this extra piece off, because you can see it gets all tangled. So I'll get my snips and just cut that off, and then I'll continue winding. So you just keep going until the bobbin was full, and the bobbin winder will stop spinning when it's full, and that's how you know it's done. You'll slide it over, and then you can take your snips again, or you might have a machine that has a built-in bobbin thread cutter, and you just pull it through that hook. You're ready to go. You can put this back down into your machine. Now that I'm done winding the bobbin, I need to re-thread my machine. And I want to apologize right now. This might get a little shaky because I moved to holding the camera handheld. So you can see there's the 1 and the 2. So let's start there. 1, 2, then we're going to go down, 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 down. Sorry. Back up. Here's number 4. It's telling you you need to go around that metal piece and back down. Then here's number 5. So you see it needs to go down through that channel and behind that metal, and then whoops. There's one more hook right here, and then you've threaded the machine, but you still need to thread the needle. So I need to go back to my tripod for this one. To thread the needle, I'm going to drop down the automatic needle threader, and if it's not locking in like that, it means that your needle isn't in the right position, so it might be either too high or too low. So you want to adjust it until your automatic needle threader is locked in, is able to lock in. So first up, there's a hook right here, and then there's also a hook that's going through the eye of the needle, and you want to make sure that it's caught down there, and then there's one last hook right here so that you can wrap the thread back forwards. Then you're going to release the needle threader, and you'll see back here there's a loop of thread. You're just going to want to pull that. And sometimes I can't get it just right, so I use something that's a little sharp. And there you go. Your needle is threaded. So just practice a couple times and I think you're going to get it. So we have wound the bobbin, we've placed the bobbin, we've threaded the machine, and we've threaded the needle. The last thing you need to do is check your tension. And so you would run through 2 pieces of fabric, or maybe there's one piece of fabric that you've doubled over like this, and you're going to run it through your machine and make sure that the top threads look exactly like the bobbin threads. If it looks like on one side there's like a thread going straight and then a bunch of threads going across it, that means your tension is messed up and you need to fix it. And a good way to tell which way to move your tension dial is to check your user manual. I swear, the user manual is so boring to read, but it basically has the answer to all your questions in there. So check that out, and I'm also going to make a video later on about tension and how to fix it. The very last thing I want to talk about is the tools that I keep around my sewing machine. So first of all, back here, maybe you wouldn't consider it a tool, but it's a little bin to catch thread and little pieces of fabric. So it's just a way to make sure that stuff isn't ending up on your table and it won't get accidentally caught or sewn in your project. The other thing is this little guy. I got this little organizer at a quilt show, but I think you can find it pretty easily online. So I'll go ahead and leave a link for that if you're interested. It's a great way to keep everything in one place and not scattered everywhere. And inside that, I have this. This is a purple thing. I think it's a 6-in-1 tool. It does a lot of different things. I use it a lot as a stiletto, but it also over here has a 1/4 inch square. You can thread elastic through tubes, all sorts of stuff. I'll link to this too because it does a lot of things and I can't remember what most of them are. But I keep that nearby. I keep my little snips, my X-Acto knife for cutting my seam guide. This is a seam guide ruler, so I would drop, here, move this like this. I would drop my needle down into one of these holes based on how large I want my seam to be. And then I can put my guide along the side if I want. I've also got my seam ripper, which is very important. You are going to be using your seam ripper sooner rather than later, I'm willing to bet. And this last thing, I don't really know what it's called. If you know, please put it in the comment section. But basically, it helps me measure out quilting lines without having to mark my quilt, and I love it. I've only used it a couple times, but I love it. Okay, I lied. There are a couple more things I just remembered. This bobbin holder is great. Some people, myself included, will wind several bobbins at once, and then while we're sewing on our project, we don't have to stop and wind a bobbin when we run out. We can just put one of these suckers in there. So I love that. I also have some pins, but I rarely use them. I don't do a lot of pinning. And then last of all is a pin cushion. This isn't a pin cushion, a magnetic pin catcher, you would call it. Mostly it is just a graveyard for my old sewing machine needles, but I do occasionally use it for pins. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and link all of those in the description because I think I didn't do a very good job explaining myself there. But yeah, those are the things I keep by my machine. I totally recommend you keep them by yours too if you have them. Thanks for spending time with me today, quilters. If you want to support this channel and help me buy supplies and materials for future videos, please visit my Buy Me a Coffee page linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos. And I'll see you again real soon. Bye!